As a child, my mother on Holy Thursday would make something called capirotada. Capirotada was a special food that we would only ever have during Lent. Typically, my mom would make it for Ash Wednesday and again for Good Friday. On one level, it was well suited to be a Lenten food. It had no meat. However, capirotada was stale bread that had been soaked in concentrated sugarcane juice with layers of raisins, almonds, pecans, and cheese in between. It was topped with a cinnamon honey glaze. I can guarantee you that it tasted even better than it sounds. This was our staple food for Good Friday. I looked forward to eating on that day of fasting and abstinence because we effectively got to eat dessert as our meal. While the rules of the church guided my mother in her cooking, they did not give her an understanding of what the purpose of food was and why her family was eating in the first place. Our first reading provides us with more substantial guidance on the purpose of eating. The Passover feast was meant to remind the people of God of their flight from Egypt and escape from the dominion of sin. It is a commemorative act. The meal they eat for that feast serves to commemorate, in part, the meal that provided them with the nutritional resources to undertake a long, taxing journey. The verses that got dropped from the first reading indicate clearly that they were eating this meal in a hurry as a way to prepare for the flight the Israelites were about to undertake. Eating was part of that physical preparation necessary for fulfilling God's plan. Not only that, but the Feast of Passover was meant in part to remind them of this fact, that eating was for the sake of preparing the body for its divine mission. The second reading also highlights eating as a way to prepare oneself for one's own divine mission, to proclaim the death and resurrection of Christ. This is one of those classic instances of grace built upon nature. As animals, we are in need of external resources to be healthy and engage in activity. Similarly, as immortal souls, we are in need of that grace that comes from God to sustain us. God provides us this grace principally through the sacraments, and in particular through the Eucharist. The Eucharist, whose institution we celebrate today, is fundamentally nutrition for our soul, just as the food the Israelites ate to prepare for the Exodus was nutrition for their bodies. When my mom made her capirotada, she was making a pleasure-inducing food for us. It reflected a certain understanding that food was principally meant to be pleasurable, with nutrition a secondary consideration. This is a disordered way to approach eating, as well as food purchasing and preparation. There is nothing wrong with tasty food, but it cannot be the primary consideration. Whole foods sourced directly from creation, vegetables, fruit, animal flesh, and animal products are the sort of God-made foods that our Creator gave us to nourish ourselves. And this is exactly the kind of foods with which the Jews nourished themselves. On the other hand, the ultra-processed foods that are part of the standard American diet prioritize tastiness, low cost, and an extended shelf life. The abundance of cheap, delicious, and convenient food leads to the physical ailments of obesity and all sorts of other metabolic disorders like diabetes. Prioritizing pleasure in our diets impairs our physical health. In an analogous way, the reception of the Eucharist also needs to be understood as spiritual nutrition. The Eucharist is not meant to make you feel good or provide some spiritual consolation. It may do so, but that is not its purpose. It provides you with the spiritual wherewithal to live out your vocation. You should also definitely not be receiving communion simply because you are accustomed to it, and especially not because you don't want to look weird by not receiving the Eucharist. A curious phenomenon I have observed since I celebrate Mass in English and in Spanish is that in Spanish language Masses, it's very rare that even half of the people there receive communion, whereas it's certainly the normal amongst English speakers that almost everyone will receive. It certainly reflects some sort of a difference in understanding either of themselves or of the Eucharist. And our spiritual health is also compromised when our reasons for consuming the Eucharist are disordered. The intention that you provide is necessary, but not sufficient for a spiritually nutritious reception of the Eucharist. At the level of biological nutrition, an important aspect of eating is determining whether or not you are able to benefit from the consumption of a food. The food in and of itself may be nutritious, but your body may be incapable of digesting it. Or you may be too sick for a time to ingest a particular food, or you're too sick. In such situations, even while intending to eat for nutrition, you can impair your health by eating a food that is objectively nutrition. Right after our second reading, St. Paul talks about this sort of self-assessment prior to receiving our spiritual nutrition. Quote, "Therefore, whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord. Each one must examine himself before he eats of the bread and drinks of the cup. For anyone who eats and drinks without recognizing the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. That is why many among you are weak and sick, and a number of you have fallen asleep. Now, if we judged ourselves properly, we would not come under judgment. But when we are judged by the Lord, we are being disciplined so that we will not be condemned with the world." St. Paul asks us to judge ourselves properly, which includes recognizing our body. A failure in doing so results in the Lord's judgment. We need this virtue of judging ourselves properly. Our normal biological eating provides us with the opportunity of practicing this proper self-judgment multiple times a day. Perfect practice perfects us, and grace builds upon nature. During this time of the upcoming festive octave, may we always keep in mind the genuine needs of our body whenever we eat. Doing this not only so that it may cultivate our physical health, but also to serve as a foundation to authentically judge ourselves properly for a fitting and fruitful reception of the Blessed Sacrament.